Well, let's get started. We got a packed event today. So welcome to the third day of the inaugural UBC Climate Emergency Week and our event Committing to Change, Dialogue with UBC Leadership. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a very exciting event lined up for you all. My name is Pablo Akira Beimler, and I am fortunate to be serving in a newly created shared role as co-manager of the UBC Climate Emergency, alongside the amazing Nadia Zhou, serving to support coordinating and convening around UBC's climate emergency. We are also a part of a group of wonderful and supportive staff from the newly rebranded Sustainability Hub. I would like to start by acknowledging UBC's campuses are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and on the traditional territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. Indigenous peoples have stewarded these lands through ways of living, being, and doing that have sustained them, their cultures and traditions, and their lands and waters for millennia or time immemorial. I am a recent immigrant of Canada and currently live as an uninvited guest on Musqueam lands. Having received all of my education in the United States before moving here, the history of Canada was barely a blip in my studies, a failing of our educational system and admittedly of my own ignorance. This left me with a rosy picture of Canada that glossed over the long and continued history of settler colonialism in all of its violent, oppressive, assimilative forms on Indigenous peoples. I'm enormously grateful to have recently finished my master's at the School of Community and Regional Planning in the Indigenous Community Planning program. I had the privilege of learning from incredible Indigenous professors and mentors, my Indigenous and non-Indigenous justice-oriented peers, and leaders, elders, community members from the host community of my capstone project, Stella 10 First Nation. By being immersed in community and learning from my peers and educators who demonstrated leadership by creating supportive and open spaces for dialogue and learning to grow together, I was fortunate to be a part of this unique learning journey. Reflecting on these experiences, I'm reminded of the importance of reforming our education systems, especially in times of crises, from the climate emergency to colonial violence to racial injustice. We have an enormous responsibility in academia to unlearn the types of research and education that perpetuate harm, to teach the real histories and interconnections, to work and learn in partnership with communities, to hold ourselves accountable to the commitments we make, from the Indigenous Strategic Plan, to the Inclusion Action Plan, to the Climate Action Plan, to the Climate Emergency Task Force Report. Like land acknowledgements, plans and reports must be followed by action. Action to far exceed our 2030 goals, which requires bold leadership. Action to center voices from communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, where many of the solutions lie, which requires humble leadership. Action that treats systems as interconnected, which requires informed and holistic leadership. I invite you to take a moment to reflect on those planetary health, equity, and justice leaders in your life who inspire you through their bold leadership. The land defenders, the role models, inspiring global leaders, leaders within your own family or your ancestors, or perhaps some of them are even in this room with you today. What are the qualities they demonstrate? What are the values they adhere to that align with your values systems? How does their leadership continue to inspire you when you step into leadership roles in your own life? If you feel compelled to share and amplify those leaders, I encourage you to share on social media with the hashtag we're using this week, hashtag UBC Climate Love, and perhaps extend gratitude to them, however that looks. Bold leadership is at the heart of our event and conversation today. Today, we will learn from UBC leaders, those in the administration, and those who are students, about their visions, actions, and commitments towards acting on the climate emergency. In 2019, during the wave of climate strikes that shook the world, UBC declared a climate emergency thanks to the bold leadership and advocacy largely shown by droves of students. Administrative leaders met with these students over several meetings to talk about where to go from here, spurring the creation of a task force and extensive engagement process throughout 2020, led by the Climate Hub. Hundreds of UBC community members across the spectrum and disciplines gathered to share their input, which working groups of students, staff, and faculty used to inform the development of a set of 28 recommendations and 9 priority areas that span a spectrum of systemic changes needed to advance UBC's commitment and global responsibility towards climate leadership and global partnership. A final report was created and was eventually endorsed by the Board of Governors on February 16th, 2021, exactly a year ago from today. This one-year anniversary was the inspiration for pulling together this Climate Emergency Week. It is an opportunity to check in on and celebrate the extensive progress that has already been made at UBC, and to also recognize the enormous work still to be done in this ambitious but all too important climate emergency response. It is also an opportunity to re-energize and reconvene around the ever-evolving and worsening climate crisis. It is an opportunity to mobilize ourselves through deep care and community building while taking the urgency of the matter seriously. Climate Emergency Week has been made possible through collaborative planning and advocacy by many groups, such as the Sustainability Hub, AMS, and Climate Hub, and through funding support from PICS and UBC Wellbeing, and in partnership with AMS Sustainability Week and the Move UBC campaign, while also recognizing it is Black History Month. There are a number of ways to participate this week, both online and in person, from nature walks to a climate kiosk to a beach cleanup, from student roundtables to incredible guest speaker events featuring Dr. Ingrid Waldron this past Monday and Chief Dana Tija Tram of Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation this Friday. We encourage you to register for and take part in Thursday and Friday's events, which you can see in the link posted in the chat. But turning to today's event, I'd like to introduce you all to our student moderator today. Samuel Adeyanju is a PhD student at the Faculty of Forestry. His focus is on African environmental politics and the socio-political dimensions of natural resources management policies and programs in West Africa. He is a forest and climate advocate with over 4 years of experience in climate change advocacy and education at grassroots and international level policy forums. As the current academic lead at the Climate Hub at UBC, Samuel leads the Climate Teaching Connector program and runs student climate advocacy workshops. I know Samuel is a passionate voice committed to climate justice and who is making this university a better place through his advocacy and leadership. The thoughtfulness, friendliness, and care he brings to this work are just some of the many reasons I'm grateful to have Samuel be an integral part of this climate community. So with that, I will pass it along to Samuel, and please give a warm welcome to Samuel. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Pablo, for the warm welcome and for introducing today's event. For our format today, I will start by introducing our exciting group of panelists, of student leaders and administrators at UBC. Each of them will have the opportunity to share a briefing on their climate emergency related visions and priorities. This will set us up for a conversational dialogue for the rest of the event. Our audience members will be able to share any questions you have for the panelists through the Q&A function on Zoom. Questions will be monitored by our wonderful tech team at the Sustainability Hub. Today, we are honored to be joined by 6 UBC leaders who serve in a wide range of roles within the university with representatives from both Vancouver and Okanagan campuses. With us today are Linda Nolan, Dr. Leslie Comack, Tashia Kutinayu, Michael White, Ashana Bangu, and M. Maite Trana. I hope I'm able to pronounce those names correctly. I guess as we go on the event, you can please do well to correct me on the pronunciation of those names. To kickstart our conversation this afternoon, we'll be sharing with you a video update from Professor Santa Ono, the President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of British Columbia. Over to you, technical team, for the video presentation.
Dear members of the UBC community, in 2019, UBC declared a climate emergency, and last year, the Board of Governors endorsed the Climate Emergency Task Force report and recommendations. UBC is actively addressing the climate crisis. We have pledged to achieve net zero operational emissions by 2035 and to reduce our emissions by at least 85% below 2007 levels. And recently, we unveiled the Climate Action Plan 2030, which will help to reduce UBC's long-term carbon liability, as well as help future-proof buildings and support campus infrastructure against the impacts of climate change. However, we need to go further. We're in a code red for humanity and all non-human beings on this planet. The climate emergency requires urgency, action, accountability, and justice. It also requires more care for ourselves, care for each other, and care for our planet. We know that the climate crisis disproportionately impacts Indigenous, Black, and people of color, communities, and intersects with the greatest systemic issues of our time. We have a responsibility to act and embody bold change as an institution and individuals. And it's important to work in partnership across all of our units and faculties and with other partners and communities, especially those most impacted by the climate crisis, to address the most urgent climate justice challenges. I would like to thank all of the students who have been instrumental in pushing for climate action at UBC, and indeed all of the leaders across UBC at every level who are turning the climate emergency recommendations into action. And I would like to thank every member of the UBC community for doing your part in addressing the climate emergency. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Ono, for the warm welcome and for giving us that very important background about climate emergency at UBC. I'll be sharing the bios of our honored speakers and invite them to each give a 2-minute opening statement. The opening statement should address how we are faring, where we are at, and where we are going as we mark the 1-year anniversary of the UBC Board of Governors endorsement in principle of the UBC Climate Emergency Task Force report and recommendation. I will start by introducing Linda Nolan, who is the Senior Director of the UBC Sustainability Hub. Since joining UBC in 2020, Linda has co-led the development of the Sustainability Hub strategic plan, instituted the Climate Justice webinar series, and started a new program to convene and coordinate work on implementing the UBC Climate Emergency Task Force report. Linda is an adjunct professor at the Allard School of Law, where she co-teaches an environmental law workshop. I will invite Linda to give a 2 minutes opening statement.
Thank you, Samuel, and welcome everybody. We're so pleased to be here with you with senior leaders from the administration and senior student leaders. It's a real pleasure to be here. We hope you've had a chance to visit our pop-up booth near Martha Piper Plaza this week, where you can win chocolates and other swag and learn more about the climate emergency. And we hope that you've been enjoying some of the events and will sign up for more. I'm just going to say a few words about the climate emergency in general, and then talk about the role of the Sustainability Hub. And that is our new name. Pablo's already mentioned it. We're very excited by the launch of our new strategic plan and new name. But first, the climate emergency. Why should we care? And we heard about this from President Ono, and I think probably everyone joining this call understands the gravity of the situation we face today. We have global agreements that are aiming to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial times. And that sounds so technical. Why is it so important to limit global warming to that 1.5 degrees? What's the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius warming? It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it definitely is. And we're not on track, by the way, I think that shouldn't come as a surprise. If we can limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we can probably prevent most of Greenland and the West Antarctic ice sheets from melting and collapsing and causing even more sea level rise than we already are facing. But even so, some coastal cities, some low-lying island states will be inundated. Coral reefs At 1.5 degrees, we're on the path to destroy at least 70% of reefs, not only the reefs, but the fish that live there and the people that live on the fish. If we go beyond 2 degrees C, it's goodbye to 99% of coral reefs around the world. There's crop failures, extreme hunger, climate refugees, and the types of events that we experienced here in BC this year, the heat dome, the floods, the deaths. It's a really grim picture. And the most vulnerable people will suffer the most. They're also the ones who did the least to cause the problem. Whether we're talking about people in the global south, Indigenous communities across the world or here in Canada, or people living in poverty everywhere. We have a moral obligation to act, and UBC is acting, and I'm proud to be part of it. 1.5 degrees is possible. We can do it. No less than the International Energy Agency has a roadmap to net zero by 2050 with key milestones. And I encourage everybody to take a look at some of these roadmaps that are out there for how we can reach these goals. It is possible, and UBC is at the forefront with its research, world-leading researchers, members of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with the teaching that we have, new climate courses being added all the time, with our community engagement programs and partners, and with the work all of the units are doing on both campuses at the staff level, operationally, which Michael will talk about, and here on the academic support side, which I'll talk about a little bit right now. So we're really pleased at the Sustainability Hub to have been given the responsibility to convene and coordinate work on the recommendations from the Climate Emergency Task Force. So what does that mean? What have we been doing? Well, it's a great honor. We can't do it alone. We're working with so many people. First, we have a new team. Pablo's one of them. Nadia is the other. We're so pleased to have these two people join our team. But across our entire Sustainability Hub, the climate emergency is an integral part of each of our programs, whether we're talking about the grad student sustainability scholars or the undergrad sustainability ambassadors or the faculty level sustainability fellows. The climate emergency is forefront of our work. And it's important and evident throughout campus. You can see new faculty hires. You can see an announcement from the Peter Wall Institute of a new Catalyst program focusing on climate and nature emergency, bringing interdisciplinary scholars together. You can see this commitment in so many places. We have a new website. Well, we took over a website and we've updated it with news and events, climateemergency.ubc.ca. And we're reporting there on the progress. And we have a number of stories from all over campus, stories of student action, of faculty and staff action. And I urge you to take a look at that website too and follow along and contribute your own stories. We're always looking for more stories. We have action committees, climate action committees in many of the faculties, and we're encouraging the formation of more, and we know more are moving in that direction. And on the climate justice side, we're working really hard to make progress on some of those key recommendations from the Climate Emergency Task Force, recommendations that require centering and prioritizing Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways in each climate decision, prioritizing climate justice leadership and celebrating and supporting climate leadership by IBPOC communities. These are critical issues and we are making progress. Just this morning, we were able to speak with the Indigenous Strategic Plan Implementation Committee about the possible reformation of an Indigenous Climate Advisory Committee. That's one of the specific recommendations in the Climate Emergency Task Force report. So it's wonderful to get to talk with supportive people in all corners of campus and understand that everyone is committed to this. We can reach 1.5 degrees and not exceed it. And we can find a more just and sustainable future. So I'm just going to end with our new vision and mission for the Sustainability Hub. Our vision is pretty big and bold. We want a just, and sustainable world. They go hand in hand, justice and sustainability. And our mission is inspiring people to act upon the planet's most urgent challenges through UBC's academic and operational sustainability leadership. We know UBC is a leader. There's still more to do, and together we can really make progress. So really happy to be here for the discussion, and welcome questions and discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for providing such broad overview of the UBC Sustainability Hub and all the very important work going on climate change at UBC. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Leslie Cormack, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Principal of UBC Okanagan. Dr. Cormack joined UBC in 2020 from the University of Alberta, where she served as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts. Dr. Cormack is also an historian of early modern science, specializing in geography and mathematics of the 16th century England. Over to you, Dr. Cormack.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And thank you to all the organizers and my fellow panelists, and to the UBC Climate Hub co-student directors for the invitation to be here today to represent UBC's Okanagan campus. I'm already inspired by what we've been hearing, and I'm really looking forward to this hour to really talk through some of the issues with all of you. As you heard, I've only been at UBC Okanagan for 18 months now. And when UBC issued its declaration on the climate emergency, I was still in my previous role as Dean of Arts at the University of Alberta. And I remember being struck by it at the time. And a notable difference I found since coming to UBC is UBC's willingness to take bold institutional positions on important conversations. And clearly there are few issues more consequential than the state of our climate and the changes that has been caused by human activity. I'm fascinated and grateful to be involved in this conversation and to consider how the Okanagan campus is helping the university to fulfill its climate emergency commitments, something we're very motivated to do. As many of you already know, the Okanagan campus is situated in a part of the province that regularly experiences firsthand the effects of the climate emergency. Those effects include intense and long-lasting wildfire and its smoke, loss of infrastructure and livelihoods due to extreme weather events, and displacement of people, all of which we know disproportionately affects Indigenous communities and marginalized populations. I look forward to the conversation and considering what more can be done, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that are happening on our campus as we move forward to really fulfill the needs of this climate emergency. Our work to expand climate education opportunities is led, I think, by our new interdisciplinary Bachelor of Sustainability degree, one of the very first of its kind in Canada, which integrates content from across 3 faculties and includes a requirement that all students undertake a coursework in Indigenous knowledge. A great example of our work to extend the Living Lab research opportunities beyond campus is the Wilden Living Lab. There, our engineering professors are working with Okanagan College and local developers to find ways to standardize construction of net zero residential buildings using the optimal combination of materials, systems, and construction practices. This has the potential to revolutionize the construction of homes in the future. In terms of strengthening and coordinating climate research, our Vice President Research worked with Gail Murphy to host UBC's first climate research symposium in October. That event brought together virtually climate researchers to improve connectivity between the clusters of relevant research activity across both UBC campuses. It led to the creation of the UBC Climate Research Working Group, which is developing a list of recommendations that can be approached at the system level. These are just a few of the initiatives underway involving UBCO. We have many research projects involving a real desire to look at clean tech and revolutionizing energy production. We also are working on the facilities and moving towards decarbonization of our buildings in really important ways that you'll hear more about, I suspect, from Michael White. So there's many more things I could talk about, but I just wanted to give you a kind of flavor that across the spectrum, from teaching and pedagogy to research to community building, we are very committed to the climate research that we need to work on the climate emergency. So thank you again for this invitation, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Leslie, for giving us some insight about the great work going on in UBC Okanagan Campus. I'm going to be introducing Tashia Kutinayo, who is a Stuni Seals queer identified woman from the Alexis Nakota Seals Nation. She has been an active student leader on the Okanagan campus for the past 3 years. Tashia currently serves as president of the Students Unions of UBC Okanagan, representing UBC's undergraduate and graduate students. Over to you, Tashia.
Isnish, thank you for the invitation to be here. And thank you, Samuel, for that introduction. My name is Tashia Kutinayo. I am the president at the Students Union Okanagan, and notably the first Indigenous president at Students Union at UBCO. As student leaders, we've been pushing the administration and our local governments to have these conversations addressing climate change in multifaceted, holistic, community, and collaborative approach of ways. We understand that IBPOC and marginalized communities and islands and urban environments are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. We understand that having a cohesive strategy is vital to resource management, mitigating issues with the transfer of renewable resources, economic reasons, and more. We also know this is important to granting food security. Here at the Students Union at UBC Okanagan, we've not only been working in collaboration with the administration, we've also been leading and spearheading initiatives with our student associations, most notably with our Plant Forward food campaign that not only aims to address the issue of food security on our campus and start the conversation about what a climate-friendly diet looks like, but also engages students in a meaningful way. As an Indigenous woman, I understand that the relationship to land that I hold is unique. And it's so wonderful to be a part of a conversation with other individuals who understand not only the importance of our land and our resources, but having these hard and tough conversations and having real discussions around climate change. I'm very excited to be here today, and I look forward to having a discussion with you all.
Thank you, Tashia. We're grateful to have you here as well. I'm going to be introducing Michael White, who joined UBC as the Associate Vice President of UBC's Campus and Community Planning, C+CP, in early 2014. In this role, he leads a team of 60 in the interdisciplinary staff responsible for a broad set of municipal functions, including campus planning and design, development services, sustainability and engineering, community development, and public and stakeholder engagement. Michael is an urban planning professional with 25 years of experience in North America, the Middle East, and Asia, and specializes in urban, regional planning, strategic planning, leadership development, and public engagement. Michael holds a Master of Science in Planning from the University of Toronto, a Bachelor of Arts from the University of British Columbia, and he is a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Samuel. And I think the ray of sunshine hitting the office is timed very well, that ray of hope that Linda talked about. So I just want to thank the Sustainability Hub and everyone on the climate emergency team for all the great work that you've been doing and for organizing the Climate Emergency Week and this event today. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about our Climate Action Plan 2030, and more specifically, because I think a lot of people are quite familiar with it now, specifically how it intersects with Campus Vision 2050, which is a long-range campus land use planning process, which we've just launched. And I'll do that, I promise, in about 2 minutes. So Climate Action 2030, as many of you are probably now familiar with, has taken a very bold step forward for the university, and I think really built on and initiated by that climate emergency process that Linda and others described earlier. You'll see in the Climate Action Plan for both campuses very ambitious targets for reduction of GHGs at the Vancouver campus by 85%, Kelowna by 65%. We can talk about why there's a difference in those two. And probably most importantly, I would say this time, those are aggressive. But probably more importantly is the inclusion of extended emissions, commuting, waste, food, air travel, embodied carbon, to reduce those by 45%. This is very ambitious because it's beyond the institution's direct control. That means it's going to have to be a very strong partnership with the community and all the constituencies across our campuses and beyond. And so starting later this year, engagement and outreach activities will accelerate to really foster and build that, I'll call it a coalition around those extended emissions. And I think that's also a nice segue into Campus Vision 2050, because there are lots of great intersection points. And it's safe to say that addressing the climate emergency is going to be a critical factor in defining the future of the Vancouver campus. So it is going to be a comprehensive planning process. It's our official community plan, if you will, and it will be a vision, 30-year vision and 10-year specific plan for the campus. And it's going to take about 2 years to complete. There's a lot of engagement, a lot of technical work to undertake. And all the way along, we'll be engaging extensively with the campus community and with Musqueam to create those long-term plans. It will encompass academic and neighborhood lands. And it's going to be an opportunity to plan for change in ways that embrace the existing physical and ecological assets of the campus, along with an increased Indigenous presence to create a strong sense of place and belonging. And it's a critical opportunity to respond to several of the complex societal imperatives that have been referenced today. The intersection points with the climate action plan are many. I'll just give a few highlights to stay within my couple minutes here. I think the first on climate justice, one I think really great example is our engagement process with the Musqueam First Nation. And for Campus Vision 2050, we're doing something we've never done before, which is actually co-develop an engagement process right out of the gate with Musqueam. And so we've developed recently some principles of engagement, and now actually defining techniques and activities to work with the Musqueam community at every step of the way through the development of Campus Vision 2050. We have a preliminary terms of reference on our website for Campus Vision, and you'll see every section referencing Musqueam interest, and that's built on the last couple of years of engagement, but also recent engagement we've been having with Musqueam through the relationship agreement, which is a process to create a new agreement and relationship, a much deepened relationship with Musqueam. And land use engagement is a really big part of that. And so Campus Vision 2050 is a great, I would say almost trial run to demonstrate that deepening relationship. And I think it's something we can be very proud of, doing it in a different way this time. A couple physical intersections, I'll call them. We know that the UBC community wants to see more student, faculty, and staff housing on the campus and the relationship that has with GHGs, but also community health and well-being. We've also heard very loud and clear that the campus community strongly supports the extension of SkyTrain to campus, which is going to take a lot of vehicle miles off the road and reduction in GHGs. And also, again, coming back to that idea of community well-being and community health. These are not easy conversations to be having. And I think many of you know that have been involved in community planning processes. There's a lot of interests around the table that need to be addressed. So when we talk about increasing housing opportunities, that needs to be done in a way that supports community amenities and open space and infrastructure and livability. And it's achievable. It's a high bar, and we think that's the kind of conversation we need to have. The same comes with transportation changes on campus. These are conversations that we're hoping and promote it today, that all of you get involved in our various activities. And if you visit our website, which will be provided through a link here, to get engaged, because these are going to be complex, very involved conversations for the future of the campus that will have a direct bearing on our ambitions around climate action and its components, including climate justice. So I think I will stop there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments during the discussion part of the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing. I'm going to move now to Ashana Bangu, who is the Vice President Academics and University Affairs at the Alma Mater Society. which represents an all 56,000 plus UBC Vancouver students. She has served as a student senator for 2 years. During this time, she's co-chaired the Student Senate Caucus and chaired the Vancouver Senate Budget Committee. Ashana is a third-year student specializing in international relations. Over to you, Ashana, for your opening statement.
Samuel, you took most of my opening statement there. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here among such auspicious speakers and leaders when it comes to climate action at UBC. Well, my name is Ashana and I'm the Vice President Academic at the Student Union, representing all UBC Vancouver students. And I think a huge part of our role at this university when it comes to climate action and climate justice is really holding the university accountable to their commitments. And part of that has been really leading the charge on kind of seeing how we can all work together to ensure the climate emergency task force recommendations are being implemented. How can we ensure that climate action, climate activism, climate justice is being embedded in curriculum? How can we push for that kind of change? Of course, the AMS itself is very large as well. We do have the AMS Student Nest, our own building and businesses that we operate. And I'm very happy to say that we have our own AMS Sustainability Action Plan called ASAP, which sets the strategic direction for the way AMS wishes to lead in this direction and contribute to climate action efforts at this university as a student union. I'm also very excited to say that we are carbon neutral. So now it's really focusing on how can we do more, but that's just about the AMS. We need to move beyond carbon neutrality. There's still such a long way to go as a university, holding each other accountable and ensuring that it's really a concerted effort on multiple fronts, whether it's the Climate Action Plan 2030 or the Climate Emergency Task Force recommendations. I think from the AMS, we really believe it's essential we see one thing through before moving on to the next, or at least do them in conjunction. So I guess I'll leave it there. I'm very happy to be here. And I think this is such an important conversation to be having as we look to continue treating the climate emergency as the emergency it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being concise and for putting it out that there's carbon neutrality with the AMS nest. The last but not the least speaker is M. Metatrane. M is a Chinese Dutch settler studying the honors psychology program at UBC with a minor in gender, race, sexuality, and social justice. Since early high school, building climate community with other queer, disabled, and BIPOC student activists has been a main source of joy in M's life. And they now serve as co-student director of the UBC Climate Hub. Especially close to M's heart is the Hub's Youth Climate Ambassadors Project, YCAP, a climate justice storytelling program that they co-founded in 2019. Over to you, Em.
Thanks, Sam, for the introduction. To contextualize my position a bit more, as Sam said, I'm a fourth-year student majoring in psychology, and I've been involved with the Climate Hub at UBC Vancouver in both work and volunteer capacities since my first year of undergrad. And joining the Climate Hub community for me really revolutionized my understanding of climate change and climate justice. For those of you who don't know much about the Climate Hub, we're a student-led, staff-supported hub for climate justice research, policy, and action. We were established in 2018 by founder and past student director Grace Nosek with the goal of connecting and empowering university and community stakeholders to take coordinated and systemic actions towards a climate just future. We take an approach to climate justice that is based around values of hope, joy, agency, and radical community building. And these values are what I think really makes the Hub such a special and unique part of the Vancouver campus. The Climate Hub has played pretty significant roles in coordinating and implementing the climate change, the UBC climate emergency process. In spring 2020, we spearheaded over a dozen virtual community consultation dialogues, facilitated the climate emergency task force working groups, and were also instrumental in the creation of the final report and recommendations for the climate emergency. As we move into this next era of climate emergency work, the Climate Hub will continue to administer a diverse set of student-facing programs that were each uniquely formed based on gaps identified by the community. Since the consolidation of the climate emergency final report, we've also been working to ensure that our programming aligns with the climate emergency strategic priorities. So for example, our Climate Justice Research Collaborative program pairs undergraduate students with graduate students, faculty, and partner organizations in order to conduct self-directed climate change research. And our partner organizations include several BIPOC-led initiatives such as Hogan's Alley and Indigenous Climate Action. Another significant contribution to intersectional climate education on campus is our Climate Teaching Connector program. So this initiative equips graduate students who are studying climate change related topics with skills to facilitate conversations around climate justice in undergraduate classrooms. Teaching faculty are able to request these students to come in and speak on their area of expertise, and thus has really enriched the level of climate justice discourse happening across undergraduate faculties and departments. And so that's just a tiny sneak peek of the Climate Hub's programming. We're always happy to connect with folks who are interested in learning more. And at the end of the day, our ultimate goal is to create spaces for climate action that foster hope and joy, while still acknowledging the grave and disproportionate consequences of climate change on marginalized people. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you, Em, for introducing us to the Climate Hub. I'm going to also invite the audience to please put out your questions using the Q&A questions. If you have questions for a specific panelists or just any question in general, please feel free to put out your question at this time. I'm going to be zooming in more on some of the responses that our panelists already gave, and just to get more sense of some of the priorities as it relates to the Climate Emergency Task Force report. So my first question would be, how are your units, organizations, current or planned programs and initiatives supporting the advancement of the Climate Emergency Task Force report and recommendation? Or what does these recommendations mean to you as an organization? I'm going to start with Linda. Over to you, Linda.
Thanks, Samuel. Well, I gave some examples of how our work is advancing the Climate Emergency Task Force report. We do have these two new staff who have been just doing a great job, for example, helping to organize Climate Emergency Week and all the events that are happening this week. The new website I mentioned, the Indigenous Advisory Committee that we're starting up, a greater range of partnerships off campus, such as with different First Nations in the community, and more relationships with NGOs who are working on climate action and climate justice. We have our climate justice series. We think that contributes directly to two of the priorities in the Climate Emergency Task Force report about increasing educational resources on climate, and also helping to foster a culture of engagement and advocacy on climate. So we've had, I don't know, between 7 or 9 events so far this year, and that's as a direct result of working on this climate justice series to bring a range of speakers, a wide range of speakers, elected politicians, students, faculty, community leaders, Indigenous leaders to share their experience. Another highlight I will mention, again, a direct outcrop of the Climate Emergency Task Force report. It called for an open and transparent delegate selection process for COP26, or COP, the Conference of the Parties to the Climate Treaty meetings. Before UBC is in a great position, it's accredited to attend UN events like many universities. And each year it receives a certain number of badges for people from UBC to go and take part. This year, for the first time, we had this open process. We solicited applications from the whole community and received more than expected, over 70 applications for what turned out to be 8 spots. So it was pretty challenging to winnow it down. But it was a great process. We brought the winners together, and they're actually working on a publication based on their experience in attending COP26 in Glasgow in November. And we also hosted a number of events, including live from COP with those delegates. And also, I think the most popular event we've had this year, with over 1,000 registrants and not that many actual participants, but in the multi-hundred participants, 600 or 700 participants, for what's at stake at COP26. Again, creating this culture of engagement and advocacy. So we're really sort of firing on all fronts. But as I said, there's no way we alone could implement this report. together with faculty, operational staff. You heard from Dr. Cormack how UBCO is working on these issues. You heard from Michael White how the campus and community planning team, large team, is working not only on the operational issues, but also on embedding climate justice in the work of CAP 2030 and Campus Vision 2050. So yeah, I mean, I could keep talking, but I don't think I will. There's just so much that we're doing. We're also in the fortunate position of having some new staff to help with this work and with this responsibility to convene and coordinate work. So I think we're very lucky to be in this position of working hard on what our whole team feels is just such a vital issue and a sentiment I'm sure you all share. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Linda. I'm going to move to the Okanagan campus. What are the perspectives from UBCO with regards to the advancement of the Climate Emergency Task Force reports and recommendations? Over to you.
Thank you. When you talked about my organization, and I thought, okay, well, that's the entire campus, and so it has a big remit here. I think there's three ways that I think are really important in this, and the first is in very much our core mission, that is teaching and pedagogy on the one hand and research on the other. And I think that from the point of view of the UBC Okanagan campus, that we have, especially in the area of research, been digging deep in questions of clean tech, of hydrogen production, of battery, of electric battery production, as well as really looking at social justice and climate justice in the community. From the point of view of teaching, we obviously, I've already said we have a new degree, but we also have ways into the community to think about how climate change has really impacted people in the community, and working with community businesses and farmers and people who've been impacted by floods to really help to mitigate some of those climate emergencies. Another thing that I think often gets too little credit or too little visibility is the hard and long-term work of reducing our carbon footprints in our buildings and on our campus. And some of that doesn't feel very sexy because some of it is changing light bulbs and putting in more insulation and renewing decarbonizing our heating and cooling systems. But in the years we've been doing that, we have actually reduced our carbon footprint while at the same time adding square meterage. And that's really, I'm very proud to have come into a campus that cares about that and does that every day. And then the final thing I want to say is that the relationship to community is a really important part of that the city of Kelowna really wants to electrify its bus fleet, find ways that they can reduce their carbon footprint. And we're working with them in research areas and trying to be collaborative so that we can do a better job with our transportation, but that the whole community, the whole region can benefit as well. I'm sure that Tashia can add much to this, so I'll pass it on to her.
Yeah, of course, if I'm able to just jump on there, Samuel. Okay, awesome. You know, as a students union, obviously one of our biggest facing things is always advocacy. So I think we really are strong on the ability of fostering a culture of engagement, advocacy, and climate action. To some points that Leslie's speaking to, community engagement is such an important thing in working with the city. So with our Plant Forward program, we're able to work with community partners and have that fostered, but also some of the points that the university can't always speak to, we as a students union are always right there. So whereas the BC Transit would like to reduce their carbon footprint, you know, having more rideshare programs has been a struggle with them and increasing routes for some of our urban and rural students. So those are still work in progress. And so I think one thing that everyone can speak to, especially us at the Students Union, and Ashana made a great point, we as a student union like to focus on one part at a time to ensure that our approach, although it's ambitious, is actually resulting in meaningful and informed changes. So a lot of things we're working on as a students union are advocacy centered. We have our water bottle share program, which may seem like a small fleet, but it was our starting point in our first local campaign that really asked the university to step up. And it's great to have these higher level conversations, but what are things we can do in our everyday campus lives that will show students that we as a university prioritize not only addressing climate change, but having environmental and sustainable policies and procedures. So that is kind of my answer, is where our advocacy efforts are focused right now.
Thank you very much, Tasha, for contributing to that conversation. I'm going to move to Michael now and want to get a sense of, you've mentioned some of these figures, 67% and all. So what are some of the strategic priority areas that we still need to address? We've been doing well in reducing emission, building and energy at UBC, but what are some of the other priority areas that you think we still need to address at UBC?
That's great. Thanks, Samuel. And I have to give real credit to the team here in campus and community planning and in the Okanagan and all the partners that we work with, because it's pretty comprehensive. I'm just thinking of the intersections we have a green building action plan, and most of what I'll say applies to both campuses, sometimes in little nuance, but generally applies to both a green building action plan and Vancouver, a neighborhood, basically a neighborhood climate action plan, because we have all these residential neighborhoods that flank the academic campus. So right now we're developing basically a climate action plan for those neighborhoods. We have a zero waste action plan that's being updated to answer some of the questions I'm seeing coming through around impact on the environment through the products and materials that we're using on campus. A water action plan, operational carbon, basically ways to decarbonize our energy systems, as Leslie pointed out, on both campuses, which is that's a heavy lift in terms of the climate action plan that's underway. Studies looking at embodied carbon in buildings and what do we do with legacies around that. And then to top it off, adaptation and resiliency. I think the last couple of years have been a real wake-up call for all of us in seeing a threat that's looming and then suddenly actually living through it here in the Pacific Northwest, and the shock that that's brought to all of us. So putting together adaptation and resiliency strategies for the campuses. And those are, there's retrofitting that has to happen with systems and buildings and practices. And that there's choices that are actually going to come along with these kinds of these explorations around how we invest and how we allocate resources. So it's going to be really interesting. I just listed off a whole number of them there. How do we as a university and a community start to prioritize investment in these areas and be a world-leading research institution and focus on teaching and learning and be great community partners with focus on well-being? How do we do all of that? So you can imagine it's a daunting task, but I'm really spirited by the work that's been done over the last couple of years by the team, and we'll be able to you'll be able to participate, but also track all of these items I'm talking about. I'm working with Linda on making it a little simpler to track and dashboard the success and progress we're making in all of these areas, so that it'll be easier, in addition to attending our various board meetings and whatnot, to get the more detailed reports, but to just be able to track and monitor progress, because it is so comprehensive, and that my list isn't the full list either. So I think that just shows all the various intersection points that we're trying to cover.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm going to move to Ashana now. As a representative of the Students Union, UBC Vancouver, which of the strategic priorities do you think we need to, quickly address as years come by?
Yeah, thanks for that. And first I'll say, Michael, if that isn't the full list, wow, that's probably the tallest order I've ever seen. But yes, in terms of the question, I think it's essential that we're prioritizing all the climate emergency task force recommendations. Like, there is a reason there was a task force that came up with those recommendations. They're already prioritized, right? Like, we don't need to be reinventing the wheel. or coming up with more and more innovative stuff, because we have the stuff right in front of, we have the priorities right before us. It's essential that we're resourcing them properly. I would say that's one thing the university needs to focus on. We are very ambitious. We do focus on a lot of great plans that are coming up. However, it is, I would say it's pivotal that we don't just move on without ensuring that we're properly resourcing, whether it's the emergency task force recommendations or CAP 2030 and all of these different initiatives, because when they face a loss of resource, or for example, if they're just put on the back burner, we risk losing the successful offshoots for the future. And I think sustainability is more than just like climate action. It's also sustainability of our sustainability initiatives. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't make sense sometimes, but I think it probably came across like how I was saying it. But from the AMS's perspective, we do have a long-term strategic direction that we're working on as well, while focusing on the climate emergency task force recommendations. And that was the AMS Sustainability Action Plan that I was referring to. It's a comprehensive strategic plan. We've also been working with a company called Carbon Offsetters to identify how we can become carbon neutral. And actually now we are carbon neutral. So how do we move beyond that and contribute to that university environment with our own carbon neutrality and moving beyond that? And, you know, for example, we have a lot of food and beverage outlets. We're currently looking at auditing the supply chains and ensuring we're being as sustainable as we can in our practices. So those are just some of the ways. But in terms of prioritization, I think we have everything we need to do before us. It's just time to get going, I guess, or keep going. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ashana. That's really important that we, prioritize all the recommendations and, just like you mentioned, allocate the necessary resources for the implementation. I'm going to move to and just to give you a perspective on the question we're looking at UBC in general, which strategic priority area do you need to address? Probably looking at it from the climate hub perspective now. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ashana that we must be properly resourcing climate emergency initiatives. And so I think financial commitment is a really big part of this. I think Seth Klein says it best, UBC as an institution needs to spend what it takes to win. And that means making financial commitments towards climate justice. And so just over a year ago, the UBC board and Senate endorsed the 28 climate emergency task force recommendations, but we've yet to see them allocate permanent funding to implement these recommendations. And responding to the emergency is really an institutional responsibility and can't be put on individual students to take on this burden. And currently there's an open letter being circulated that's calling on the university to claim this burden by making these necessary financial commitments. And I think that is one of the most important things that the university can do. Last time I checked, we had over 9,800 signatures, really incredible. And so you can really tell that students, staff, and faculty are under no illusion that small individual actions are going to solve this problem. And it's clear that the community at large knows that internal commitments are needed by the UBC administration if we want to truly meet the urgency and scale of the climate emergency. So now it's really time for UBC to acknowledge that as well.
Thank you so much for drawing our attention to the important call for action. I'm going to move to the topic of collaboration because, we have two campuses. There's a lot of research and innovations and teaching and learning going on the topic of climate change, issue of climate change at UBC. How well are all these parts and pieces, units collaborating to ensure that we together as a single entity or unit are able to properly address climate change? So I think I'm going to turn that over to Linda to kick us off on that particular point. Collaboration across campus, within units, how well are we doing to address the urgency and scale that the climate emergency demands? Over to you, Linda.
Okay, thank you. I get the easy one, eh? I don't know. This one might be better with either Leslie or Michael, but I'll give it a shot. We have a UBC is a huge institution with a major budget, 2 campuses, and 60,000 people altogether, students, faculty, and staff. So coordination, of course, is an issue. I'm relatively new. I joined in June 2020, and I became immersed in trying to understand how everything fits together. all the complicated governance structures. And, generally, I would say that there's a huge degree of coordination. It takes a lot of work. There's a lot of committees. Michael listed off a lot of plans. I'm not even going to try and list off committees because I know I wouldn't get very far. But I know that people at the highest levels, like Leslie and Michael, the committee meetings must take up a huge amount of your time, whether it's dealing with the Board of Governors or Senates or other types of committees that try and work towards coordination. I am familiar with the coordination that we try and do day to day and committee wise on sustainability. And we have some new structures put in place shortly before I arrived that I think work pretty well. They bring together operational staff and faculty and students in some cases. So I think that type of coordination does exist. It's time consuming. And then, there's just conflicts. Like right now, there's something Michael and I are both involved in, Campus as a Living Lab. Its whole goal is to pair up faculty researchers with operational staff to use the campus as a test bed to experiment with sustainability programs, projects, new ways of doing things. So there's a committee meeting happening simultaneously that this was a priority, so I'm here. And I'll just end with, and I'm interested in what other people think. We're also two more things. One thing is we're really fortunate to have the Climate Hub, the organization that Em's a part of, the student-led initiative on climate started a few years ago. We're fortunate to have that group sit in our office, so we have some close coordination with the Climate Hub leaders, and we're really grateful. And as you can tell, we were inspired by their name with our new name. So we work a lot with students, undergraduates, graduates, students of all kinds. The door is always open. But I wanted to say that. And then just on the day-to-day level, I think I've been really fortunate to have close working relationships with Michael, and particularly some of the people who report to him, who are on the operational side. In what I can tell, most other universities do not separate operational and academic sustainability. It's in one office. Here we have two separate offices, but we do coordinate a lot. He mentioned the dashboards. That's one thing we're coordinating on. We're also thinking about how we're going to do reporting in a way that's not so confusing for the UBC community. There's CAP 2030, a climate action plan, and there's a climate emergency task force. And we want to report, and we will report on both those things. Is there a way we can do it together to make it streamlined and more understandable? So lots of coordination happening. Is it enough? I don't know, but do any of us want to spend all day long in committee meetings? Probably not. And then nothing else would get done as well. But interested in what other people have to say on this question as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to turn it over to Michael. I think your name was mentioned quite a bit during Linda's comments. So do you want to comment on engagement and collaboration within UBC?
Yeah, sure. No, I think Linda captured it very well. And we've trying to get to a point where it's very much integrated. And I'll give you an example of about a year and a half ago, having the initial conversations with procurement and some HR managers at the university with regard to climate action. And these people's plates are incredibly full. Over that course of that year and a half, based on the conversations we've been having, but also just the level of awareness within the units, I think thanks to the climate emergency, we're seeing a sea change in terms of in those two specific examples of them fully embracing and integrating climate action and the other elements of the climate emergency into their work. And it has to be, if we're going to hit extended emissions, it has to be all of these different elements of the organization. And then it goes into the community as well. So we have active conversations with all kinds of groups, and I mentioned that the Musqueam First Nation, all the groups on campus, such as the AMS and the GSS, with the UNA, because we have 15,000 residents in our neighborhoods on campus, and those are in addition to the 14,000 students that live in student housing. All of these kinds of intersection points we have to pay attention to if we're going to tackle especially the extended emissions, and so that's underway, and it's a big boulder to move, but we're doing it. And I think Linda pointed out that's happening at the level of the decision makers at the university through those committees and whatnot, but also just on the ground with line staff who are now just incorporating it into their regular business. And it's our jobs to help now facilitate, coordinate, and then monitor and report. So that's a lot of the work Linda was describing, and then a lot of the work that my team's doing, and a lot of the work that Leslie's team is doing in the Okanagan are playing those enabling, facilitating, and monitoring and reporting roles now. So we could go on, I'm sure, but I think it just gives you a flavor of how that's being approached.
Thank you, Michael. We have some questions from the audience, and I'm going to start by asking Leslie this first question, and probably others will also contribute. The question says, how do we bring UBC's expertise and energy to advocacy and engagement for change in other spaces, particularly public policy?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a very big and hard question, in that in some ways that's part of what we do in everything we do, is how do we translate the teaching, the thinking, the research we do to really have a conversation that allows public policy to change. And I think a big, from my point of view here in the Okanagan, I do think that making those collaborations and conversations with the community leaders is a really big part of that. Because it's only by talking these things through and trying to work together on problems that we can move that kind of public policy forward. I do, however, also think that a really important part of what we do at UBC is that we provide a space for people to learn and think and research and go out into the world and be advocates for public policy change as well. And so it's not just the people you see sitting on the screen, it's all of us who share that of how do we change public policy and how do we move forward in that way. I know that's kind of a big general answer to that question, but I do think it's an important one. I also think we need to be one of the challenges as I hear us all talking is the potential that we don't have a very clear message because we're doing a lot of different things. And so how do we decide that what is it about public policy that we want to change as opposed to everything? Because I think that's harder for politicians to hear or voters to hear or city councils to hear. And so finding those things where we can make common cause and really pushing the needle makes sense to me.
Thank you very much, Leslie. So I think I'm going to marry this particular question with the previous question on collaboration and engagement at UBC. And I think Ashana would like to chime in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Samuel. I think this is the topic of collaboration is one that's favorite for us student representatives, especially on this call. I think when we talk about collaboration, perhaps the conversation can shift a little bit because collaboration isn't just about agreeing with each other on every approach, every aspect of every decision. Collaboration and improvement often looks like pushing each other. And a lot of times from a student perspective, and I'm sure the administrative counterparts over here have their own thoughts on this. For us, it really comes down to advocating to the university and pushing for that kind of change. And of course, sometimes they have arguments or reasons that are for or against our perspective, but I think that's how a community is supposed to grow. And that's what collaboration means to me, that we are constantly pushing each other to be better as an institution, better in our response to the climate emergency, treating it with the urgency that it really requires to be treated with. Of course, if you want to look at the day-to-day operational things of how we would do that, it's not always a protest out on the street. It often looks like submissions to the Board of Governors, conversations with administrators, really pushing that forward that the climate emergency task force recommendations really need to be prioritized, or perhaps climate action plan should be prioritized more heavily, whatever it is. I think collaboration should really be looked at from the lens of pushing each other to be the best that we can possibly be, and then go beyond that. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Tashia now, because I know she loves this topic as well. So go ahead, Tashia. Oh, sorry, Samuel, you're the moderator. I'll hand it back to the moderator. Sorry.
Go ahead, Tasha. Yeah, I'd like to hear your perspective.
I'm excited for M to add to this, because I think they have a lot of like grassroots things. I think there'll be a good feedback here too. Just obviously just students were, I think two things. One, the collaborative question alongside the policy question kind of intersect with each other, because as Leslie was talking about, if we want policy to be effective in creating the change that it is you want to see, specifically climate, sustainable, relevant policies that can actually do their job, you need to consult with the people whose lived experiences and relevant experiences are affected, so in that specific area or field. But then it's also being intentional. So it's important that if we want to have something relevant to Indigenous people, obviously we're intentional with our approach. We build these relationships prior to having these conversations. So we, as a students union, for an example, with our water bottle share, water to go program, when we first broached this conversation, it wasn't that there wasn't a need or a want from the university to approach single plastic waste use on campus. It was, well, how do we address all of these different procedures? And like Michael or Linda or everyone's mentioning, there's 10,001 committees. So how do you work collaboratively? And it's slowing down. That project took a year to get off the ground. COVID as a factor always in there as well, but challenging our ambition and knowing that we need to pilot these ideas. We need to take the time to be intentional. So this is an emergency and our response does need to be timely, but it's going through the right procedures to ensure that the outcome is reflective of the change we want to see is super important. So that's kind of my thing here, is making sure that although we have all these different committees and stuff, if we're all working these different organizations and different units, and our frameworks are aligned on what is a priority for climate sustainable policies or procedures at our events. It's those little day-to-day details and ensuring at your event that you're not having a bunch of food waste, that you're not doing these things. Those might seem small, but they build the cultural change that we need to integrate behaviors and beliefs on a daily basis of what it means to have these practices in our lives. So that's a really big answer. But I think it's using all of these different fears that we have and taking time to communicate with one another when relevant, and knowing that our committees aren't the end all place. It's even when we're having an event like this, how do we go about those practices? So.
And would you like to also make a comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I really think that each of our groups needs to understand the different kinds of powers that we hold and the powers that we don't hold. I know for me in 2019, I spent almost all of my time outside of class learning about divestment and fiduciary duties so that I could be campaigning for the fossil fuels divestment campaign at UBC. And we brought that information forward to the VP Finance, and they said, great, thank you so much for doing this research for us. And I really think that that could have been research that they had done themselves. And I think there's a lot of instances where UBC can be pushing themselves internally to be doing that work so that it's not all on students to do. And I really think that we can be holding ourselves to the same values across all departments and faculties, and also acknowledging that these values are going to require challenging the status quo. UBC can't play it safe if we want to keep making changes. We have to be disrupting norms and leading the way and applying theory to practice. Just as an example, 3 specific pillars that we are emphasizing this week for climate emergency are urgency, care, and community. So urgency in the sense that climate change is right now and we need to be supporting students with climate anxiety. We need to be mobilizing students towards tangible actions and supporting folks on the front lines. Care in the sense that we're asking, how do we ground ourselves in principles of justice, healing, and care for each other and for ourselves? And then finally, community. Building community is such a long-term and such a dynamic process that we need to be doing continuously and always. And it really involves nurturing the generational and the ecological sustainability of communities and building that trust and solidarity over and over and over again.
Thank you very much. There is a question here that I would like anyone who feels interested to take on. It says there is an alignment with the Paris Agreement's net zero goals has been stressed, but would anyone care to respond to the idea that in order for that to happen on a national and international scale, low emission sectors and institutions might need to achieve that goal on a more rapid timeline? Probably I need to read that question again. Alignment with the Paris Agreement's net zero goals has been stressed, but would anyone care to respond to the idea that in order for that to happen on a national and international scale, low emission sectors and institutions might need to achieve that goal on a more rapid timeline? Does anyone want to take on this question? I will probably turn it to Michael because I see emissions there.
Well, I think probably the best way to answer that is we have to be as aggressive as we can and still support the academic mission because we are a university. And we also have to push hard, but not so hard that we actually break the ability to make change and to be an agent of change. And so if we put all of our resources immediately towards this goal, it might destabilize the entire institution to the point where we can't actually be an effective agent. So I think there are there's a aggressive and reasonable way forward, and I think our climate action plan compared to other municipalities, other institutions, is incredibly aggressive. And so what we're trying to do is find that sweet spot, and maybe Leslie, I'll turn to you as well, but find that sweet spot where we are a world leader, where we are super aggressive, but we don't push it to the point of actually breaking the institution. Otherwise, we lose our agency. So
I don't think that I can add to that. I think you're exactly right, Michael, that this isn't, we have a very aggressive plan, which I'm very proud of, but I also know that we do need to make sure that the core mission of teaching and research is still very much front and center, because it's the new research, it's the teaching of people that really will also move out into the world and make a difference. So it's always that balancing act.
Thank you, Leslie. It's been said, and I believe it's widely known at UBC, that students are taking leadership, and they've really inspired a lot of initiatives at UBC, including the various divestment commitment of the university and even the climate emergency declaration. What are some of the resources that students still need to be able to mobilize what's necessary for the climate emergency? I know there's the action, the signatory stuff already launched, but what are some of the things that students need probably from the university for them to be able to make the necessary changes for climate emergency? I will start with M.
Just starting with a few things that we're calling for in the letter is, first of all, reporting on total climate emergency spending at UBC, both in terms of absolute and as a percentage of UBC's total budget. And we need that to be transparent so that we're able to see what's going on behind the scenes as students. We're also hoping that UBC will create a standing allocation for climate emergency funding in the 2022-2023 budget, and that all future budgets for programming and operations related to the climate emergency task force recommendations will have that. And also developing additional mechanisms for hiring more permanent faculty and staff positions so that they can support both us as well as the institution. I'm blanking a little bit, maybe I'll pass it over to Ashana.
Okay, I think Ashana is having connectivity issues, but I would pass it to Tasha, and I could repeat the question as well. What do you think students need to be able to mobilize what's necessary for climate emergency?
Shauna, you're here, so I'll let you go first.
I think I caught that question, but Samuel, do you mind repeating that for me, please? I apologize.
No worries. What do you think students need to be able to mobilize what's necessary for the climate emergency?
Well, I think, to be honest, what students need is to see some more institutional leadership. And that isn't to say that there isn't institutional leadership. I have great respect for the work that's being done. But I think like, while there is a partnership and collaboration of pushing each other, it is important that the burden doesn't fall on students and the student organizers all the time, right? Because I think there's no 100%, everybody in this room agrees that we are in a state of climate emergency and everybody here is working towards it. So there is awareness of that. I think what it comes down to is the priorities that students see should be coming first or being addressed immediately, as opposed to what the institution sees. I think those two need to be reconciled more. And for that, perhaps more for more opportunities for direct engagement, direct feedback, and those community consultations that aren't extractive but deeply engaging. I would say that's something that would really help in terms of getting students to mobilize. And again, I think the conversation does need to shift as to advocating to each other, pushing each other, but also working together to achieve the goals, because we are really fighting for one common thing with different perspectives and different approaches in mind. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashana. Tasha, do you want to comment quickly?
Yeah, I'll quickly comment. I think these are both kind of touched on, but to really center them, what do you think students need? Well, I think the best person to ask is students. I really believe that some of the listening sessions that have come over other task force are an amazing way that the university themselves can lead the discussion with students alongside the help of, organizations like the SUO and the AMS. Because, a lot of this conversation is education, and it's talking to students about where are they at in addressing the climate emergency. And that will help frame some of these things that are already happening and see if they're too far ahead. I think in the letter, talking to funding is a great place also, because we've all seen in the tuition engagement feedback survey, whatnot, that it asks you to kind of rate the priorities. And I think that one thing students do need is for the university to kind of say, these things are a priority to us, notwithstanding anything else. And to see where all that funding is in the different areas, I think will help create a space where they're able to do that and say, well, this is the money that we're using on all these different initiatives, and this is the sum total towards climate change. And that will help students understand more that this is a priority, and then less money, it has to come, I believe, from tuition in itself. And, those are a whole bunch of other can of worms, but.
Thank you so much, Tasha. There is a follow-up question from the previous question I asked about the Paris Agreement net zero commitment. The audience asks, do the speakers believe UBC is at the point of breaking and losing agency because it is pushing so hard on climate action?
So since Michael and I were the ones who brought that up, I'll say something. No, what I would say is that the cost of decarbonization on both campuses is many, many millions of dollars. And so it really does need to be well thought through. And so we do it in a way that allows us to continue on with all of our priorities as we move forward. So it's something that needs some quite serious planning. And that's really what I think you were hearing both Michael and I talking about. It's budget season at UBC. And so we're very aware of what's available and what's not available. And especially on the Vancouver campus, where the retrofitting of some of the old buildings is really quite astonishing. This is work that we have committed to and is really, really important. And we just need to make sure that it's all done in a timely and careful fashion. But we're not broken. We're actually, I think, doing extremely well.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for answering that question perfectly. The theme of this session is committed to change, and I appreciate that you mentioned the commitment from the UBC administration to making the necessary changes that is needed to implement the climate emergency task force reports and recommendations. The time is fast spent, and I believe Leslie's comment will be the last from the panelists. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people would still like to comment on some of the questions, but because of time, we have to end the conversation. So I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing from their experiences and making very important comments on how to achieve all the reports recommendations. I'm going to turn it over to Pablo to help close the event.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Great job moderating today's discussion. It was really enlightening, and it was just it's great. There wasn't a second of pause. I think everyone had some great things to share with our campus communities. So really appreciate. I know all of you are just incredibly busy and taking time. Even this hour and a half of time is a big chunk of your day. So again, just thank you. We might have to do more of these leadership dialogues. Well, we shall see. Yeah, so thank you again. I'm just gonna quickly share a little slide here. Give me a second. Yeah. Yep, so just wanted to again acknowledge everyone who's here today, including those who joined and asked some really great questions. And thank you to our amazing Climate Emergency Week planning team. Definitely a special shout out to Nadia Joe and Megan Wise. We had sort of brewed this idea a long time ago to have this dialogue, and it came to fruition. So it couldn't have happened without you and also the entire planning team here. Thank you also to the communications team who've been a huge support, and to all of the volunteers who are holding down some of the outreach booths on campus. It's been a lot of great outreach happening. Also, thank you to PICS and UBC Wellbeing who've supported a lot of funding for this week's events. And we hope you feel inspired and called to action after today's event. There were quite a few calls to action we heard today. So just wanted to share those with you, and Nadia will be posting some links in the chat as well for you to kind of go wild and clicking away at links and saving them on your browser. So you can read more about the Climate Emergency Task Force report and tracking the progress of UBC's response. Also check out Sustainability Hub's new strategic plan, as Linda shared with earlier. Also view the CAP 2030 plans for the campuses. Also head to your education library at the Vancouver campus. Their climate action team has been kind enough to set up some climate related curated materials as well as online. If you're looking for climate courses across UBC to roll in next term, you can head to the Sustain website and also check out, as Em was saying, there's lots of great Climate Hub programs and events. Some urgent calls to action. So as also was mentioned, CJUBC is calling on support to endorse their letter related to the permanent funding for the climate emergency. Sierra Club of BC is also encouraging people to sign an open letter calling on the BC government to confront the climate emergency and participate in those Campus Vision 2050 public engagements that Michael shared with us. Also, just below my feet, actually, here in the Sears building in Vancouver, the Food Security Initiative and partners are opening a new low-cost grocery store. And so today's actually the opening of it, and it will be available to all UBC faculty, students, and staff Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, 1 to 7. And then if you're a student, you can build your network and connections with other student leaders through the Sustainability Ambassadors Program. And you can find out more and apply by February 21st to join the fall 2022 cohorts. And lastly, it's still Climate Emergency Week. We have Thursday and Friday too with some exciting events. And tomorrow is a World Cafe event, so an opportunity to engage with some of the various campus partners who are engaged in this very work. So with that, we hope you can join for that, and also the Big Friday event as well, the closing event, which will be both virtual and in person. So with that, I just want to again say thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you again to all the panelists for everything you're doing to advance the climate emergency, and also for joining us today. So we'll see you around. Thank you.